All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. We're going to begin by thanking our sponsors for today's shir, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, to thank Meir and Rachel Gold for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Yonah, Tzvi, Ben Yosef, Chaim, Elazar, HaKohen, to thank Noam Leah Efron for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in honor of the celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather, Yosef Hershel ben Mordechai Halevi, to thank our Day of Learning sponsor, Moshe and Chavi Abramson, in the zchus of a successful procedure and complete recovery for Shmuley Abramson, Shmuel ben Shoshana, who is donating a kidney this morning, Mirtz Hashem B'Shah Tova U'Mitzlachas at 7:30, and our Daf Yomi sponsors, Milton Eleanor Marder, in memory of Rebbetzin Shoshana Steinberg, beloved mother of Eleanor Marder, Zichron Livracha. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos Lav and Aliyah, the families and those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Daf Gimel. We are picking up in Mirtz Hashem on Beis Amud Beis. And we left off 4 lines up from the bottom, Umi Mai. So just to remember, we are focusing now on the first part of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah, which highlights the idea that Nisan is the Rosh Hashana L'Melachim. Right? It is the Rosh Hashana of the way we go ahead and we count the years of the reign of a king. We'll discuss in today's daf, by the way, what kind of king, which kings. We'll get into Meretz Hashem, all of that. In any event, so the way that the Gemara was proving that this is true was from the pasuk by Shlomo HaMelech. So just, we spend a lot of time speaking about the concept, but where the idea actually comes from, the Gemara posits, comes from a pasuk in Melachim Aleph, where the Navi equates the reign of Shlomo to Yitzias Mitzrayim. And just like Yitzias Mitzrayim is counted from Nisan, so too again the reign of Malachim, the reign of kings, is counted from Nisan, or I should say, is counted from Nisan as well. So I'll say the Gemara then went on to say, well, how do you know that we count in general from Yitzias Mitzrayim? So if you remember again, the Gemara then had this discussion quoting 2 psukim, one by the death of Aaron, one by Moshe Rabbeinu giving a speech to Klal Yisrael. And the Torah identified death of Aaron was in what month? Av, and the Torah identifying the speech of Moshe being given in the month of Shvat. And the Torah identified both of those events as occurring during the 40th year. During the 40th year. So therefore, again, the only way for that, both of them to be occurring in the 40th year is what? Is if we reckon the years from Nisan, because it's from Tishrei, then Aaron, if Aaron's year 40, then Moshe Rabbeinu and Shvat would have to be 41. To which the Gemara says, Umimai, de Maisa de Av Kadim, Dil Maisa de Shvat Kadim. Says the Gemara, it's a beautiful Gemara. How do you know that the episode, the death of Aaron, occurred before Moshe Rabbeinu's speech? Remember, I will say, we have a concept of a mukdam umu'uchar b'Torah. The Torah doesn't follow a chronological sequence. So for all you know, okay, I understand Moshe Rabbeinu is giving a speech in Shvat, but maybe it's the Shvat before Aaron's death. In other words, you're assuming that the sequence is Aaron dies in Av, and then the following Shvat, Moshe Rabbeinu gives his speech. Well, maybe not. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu gives his speech in Shvat, and Aaron dies that Av. To which the Gemara says, Lo sagdaitcha dichsiv. Here's how I know it's not that way. Because the pasuk says that when Moshe Rabbeinu gave his speech, Acharei kosoa sichon. The pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu gave his speech in Shvat after he had gone ahead and conquered Sichon. V'chinoch nafshei da'aron, and when Aaron had passed away, Akati havi Sichon kayim. Sichon was still alive. So I'll say at the time of the death of Aaron, Sichon, who was one of the Canaanite kings, Sichon was still alive. So the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu's speech is given after the death of Sichon tells us that the Shvat of Moshe Rabbeinu's speech came after the Av of Aaron's death. So the Chsiv, and I'll say, how do we know? How do we know that halacha l'maisa? How do we know that halacha l'maisa Sichon was still alive at the time of Aaron's death? Because the pasuk says, top of Gimel, Vayishma Knani Melech Arad. So the Knani, the king of Arad, heard. Ma Shmua Shama. What did he hear? Shama Shemes Aaron. V'nistalku Anane Kavod. See, I will say, ultimately, when Aaron died, the Anane Kavod, the clouds of glory, dissipated. As a result, Sichon saw that as an opportunity. We're going to see that the Melech Arad, the Knani Melech Arad, is actually a reference to Sichon. They saw that there was an opportunity to attack Klal Yisrael. Ukasavar, he thought, Nitna Rishus Lihilachem B'Yisrael. So Rabbi say, interestingly enough, the Gemara teaches us that the Anani HaKavod, the clouds of glory, did not just, we think about clouds as hovering over, right? That the clouds were a protective barrier, let's say, against the punishing effects of the desert sun. The clouds were also a security barrier. What the clouds did is they obscured Klal Yisrael from sight from the neighboring nations. Aaron dies, the Anani HaKavod go away, Klal Yisrael become exposed. They're exposed. So we're going to see Sichon sees this and he says, it's an opportunity. They're vulnerable. So we'll say, each of the pasuk says the nation saw that Aaron passed away. Don't read it vayiru. They saw Ella vayirau. They were seen. They were seen. What does it mean they were seen? Because when Aaron died, ultimately the Anani HaKavod dissipate and the Klal is seen. So we'll say, Reish Lakish, and again this goes according to Reish Lakish, because what does Reish Lakish say? Dam Reish Lakish ki mishamish bedal l'shon. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the word ki has 4 different definitions. What does it mean? E means if, Dilma means perhaps, Ella but, Daha because. Shabbos says, interestingly enough, the way the pasuk is read is Vayiru kala eda. Ultimately, the entire nation was seen. Why? Ki gava Aaron, because Aaron passed away. Because Aaron passed away, the clouds, the Anani HaKavod dissipated, and therefore the nation was seen. So Shabbos say, so the Gemara says, but one second, mi dami hasam kinan hachasichon. Shabbos say, so the Gemara is using this as a proof to say that Moshe Rabbeinu's speech in Shvat must have come after the death of Aaron in Av, because when Aaron was alive, Sichon was still around, and in Moshe, by the time Moshe is speaking, Sichon has already been conquered. But here's the problem. The problem is, and the Gemara brings the proof. How do you know that Sichon was alive? That Sichon was not yet conquered when Aaron passed away, because the pasuk says, "Vayishma Knani Melech Arad." The Knani, the king of Arad, heard that Aaron had passed away. So the Gemara says, "Knani, king of Arad, that's not Sichon. That's not Sichon. That's someone else." So the Gemara says, "Tana, who's Sichon? Who Arad? Who Knan?" It's all the same person. Sichon, Arad, Knan, same person. Sichon Shedoma L'Sayach. So Sichon, because again he's comparable to a horse. Midbar Knan, Ashe Malchuso. Midbar Knan was the name of his kingdom. Umashmo, what was his real name? Arad, which is an interesting name because Arad means wild donkey, right? So again, that was his name. Arad Shmo. Ike de Amri, others say Arad Shedoma la Arad. Others say no, his name was Arad because he was comparable to a wild donkey. But Midbar Knan is the name of his monarchy, the name of his king, Hashem Achuso. Umashmo, what was his actual name? Sichon Shmo, his name was Sichon. Okay, I will say, whatever his name was, point over here is that he was alive at the time of Aaron's death. And we know that by the time Moshe Rabbeinu was giving his speech, Sichon has already been conquered. If that's the case, then the Chodesh Av of Aaron's death preceded the Chodesh Shvat of Moshe Rabbeinu's speech, and yet the Torah says they're both occurring in which year? Year 40. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, that must mean that the Rosh Hashana, the years were counted in the Midbar from Nisan and not from Tishrei. Incredible. So also, the Gemara says, I'll just tell you about as an aside. It's interesting. We know the Gemara tells us that in the Zechus of Aaron were the Anani HaKavod. And this is part of a theme. In the Zechus of Miriam, they had the Be'er, the well. In the Zechus of Moshe, they had the man. So Rabbi Silber, right, the Heilige Rizhiner asks, he says, why is it that in the merit of Aaron there was the cloud? Well, what's the what with the Anani HaKavod? What does that have to do with Aaron? So he says something so incredibly beautiful. What was the dominant trait of Aaron? What was Aaron all about? Aaron was all about shalom. And how did Aaron make shalom? Aaron was always saying words of shalom, of peace, of encouragement, of love, and achdus. The Rizhiner says something so beautiful. He says, and he encouraged other people to do the same. He says it was the Hevel Pihem, it was the breath of Klal Yisrael saying the kind words to one another, which created the Anane HaKavod. The breath of their words, of their kind words, of their words of Shalom, created the Anane HaKavod. And the Rishner says sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that words, because they're intangible, don't really mean anything. Because they're intangible, don't really create any significant realities. But says the Rishner, you see, our ancestors had the Anonim, had the clouds for 40 years because of words of Shalom, because of words of Achva, because of words of Reyos, because of words of Achdus. Words do create realities. And kind words amongst Jews create Anani HaKavod to protect us from all types of dangers. Such an incredible Rishner. So says the Gemara, Ve'ema Rosh Hashanah Iyar. So the Gemara says something very interesting. So we'll say, so now, what the Gemara is going to say is as follows. Well, how do you know that we're counting the new year? In other words, we'll say, how do you know that you're counting the new year from Nisan? Maybe it's Iyar. To which the Gemara says, Lo, sakataytcha d'chsiv vahi b'chodesh harishon, b'shana hashenis, be'echad l'chodesh hukam mishkan. The pasuk says it was the first month in the second year of the first, right, in the first of the month, the Mishkan was erected. Uksiv, vahi b'shana hashenis, b'chodesh hasheni, na'ala ha'anan me'ala mishkan ha'edos. And then the pasuk says it was in the second year, in the second month, ultimately again that the Anan rose up from the Mishkan, midikai b'Nisan. So Rabbi say, since the pasuk is talking about in Nisan, v'kari le'shana shenis, and calls it the second year. V'kai b'Iyar, v'kari le'shana shniya, and it was still an Iyar, and then what? It's also called the second year. Michlad de Rosh Hashanah lav Iyarhu. So Rabbi say, so again, a simple proof. If two psukim, one is speaking about Nisan, one is speaking about Iyar, and they're both reckoned as part of the same year, that obviously means that what? Rosh Hashanah is not Iyar. Okay, good. Ve'im Rosh Hashanah Sivan. So we're going to try to exhaust a couple of different possibilities, but maybe Rosh Hashanah is Sivan. The Gemara says, Lo sakadaytcha d'chsiv b'chodesh hashlishi l'tzeis b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. So the pasuk says, in the third month after Klal Yisrael left Egypt. V'im Isa, now both say, so remember again, the third month after we left Egypt is when? Right? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. So right, now again, if you're correct, and Rosh Hashanah, then the new years. Rabbi says, so right now, by the way, we're talking about just how they tracked time in the desert, right? Remember, although the major discussion we're having is how to track years for the king, what we established is, based on the Pasuk in Malachim Aleph, that the Navi equates counting the reign of a king with Yetzias Mitzrayim. And therefore, again, just like, so however we track time in the desert, so to speak, is how the kings track their reign. So right now we're focusing on how did they track time in the desert. So the Gemara says, Torah speaks right over here, that in the third month after we left Egypt, so also this time when we came to Midbar Sinai, Kabbalah SaTorah, we come to Sinai to receive the Torah in the third month after we left Egypt, Sivan. So says the Gemara, Vim Isa, and if you're correct that the new year is Sivan, then it should have said what? B'chodesh hashlishi b'shana hashenis l'tzeis mi baile. The Torah should have said that. Torah should have said in the third month of the second year, or the third month in the beginning of the second year. In other words, if Rosh Chodesh Sivan if Sivan is going to be the new year, the Torah should have told us that now we are in year number 2. I ve'ima Tammuz. Ve'ima Av, Ve'ima Adar. So what's the twitch thing? So we could ask this pretty much on any single month, right? Maybe this is the month of the new year. Ella Amar Elazar Mehacha. Rather, Elazar says, I'm going to tell you a definitive proof. Pasuk says, quoting in Divrei Hayomim, Vayochel livnos b'chodesh hasheni, b'sheni b'shnas arba l'malchuso. The pasuk says, Shalom Alech finished building the Beis Hamikdash. Vayochel livnos b'chodesh hasheni. Remember again, second month, which we know is Iyar, b'sheni b'shnas arba l'malchusa. So we'll say the wording over here is a little bit strange. He finished building the Beis Hamikdash in the second month, b'sheni, which means what? In the second. We're not sure what second means yet. B'shnas arba l'malchusa. In the 4th year of his reign. My sheni. Gemara says, what's the second Sheni? Right? The first Sheni is B'chodesh HaSheni. Right? That's the second month. That's year. What do you mean by Sheni? Lav Sheni Liyarak Shamon B'olam Achuso. Maybe it means they finished it in the... So I will say it's a little bit redundant, but it's teaching us an important point. In the second month, which is Iyar, which is also the second. The second of what? The second of the months by which we count the reign of the king. Which means what I will say? When do we begin to count the reign of the king? Nisan. So it's in the month of Iyar, which happens to be the second month, and also the second month by which we count the reign of the king. So the Gemara says, so you see from here that Halacha L'Maisa, they're counting the reign of the king from Chodesh Nisan. Maskef L'Ravina, Ve'ema Sheni B'Chodesh. Maybe not. Maybe the second B'Sheni means what I will say? It was the second day of the month. In other words, B'Chodesh HaSheni B'Sheni means second month Iyar. B'Sheni means second day of Iyar. To which the Gemara says, Im Kain Sheni B'Chodesh B'Hej Yahavak Bey. If that's the case, it should have said Sheni B'Chodesh, the second of the month. Ve'ima B'Sheni B'Shabbos. Maybe it was a Monday, right? Maybe the Navi is coming to tell us that Shlomo began to go out and build the Beis HaMikdash in the second month, the fourth year of his reign, B'Sheni, on a Monday. Good to start things on a Monday. First of all, it doesn't say Monday. Right? That's number one. Right? It's number one. V'od makish sheni basra l'sheni kama. Furthermore, we can go ahead and essentially equate the two shenis in the pasuk. Ma sheni kama chodesh, av sheni basra chodesh. Just like the first sheni is referring to a month, so too not to a day of the week, right? Not to a day of the month, but to the month itself. Av sheni basra chodesh. So too the second sheni also refers to the month. So therefore, I will say, what comes out over here is as follows. Another interesting proof by Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says, how do you know that we go ahead, Rabbi will say, how do you know that we go ahead and we count the reign of the king from Chodesh Nisan? Because the pasuk says, Vayachal livnos b'chodesh hasheni. Shlomo began to build the Beis HaMikdash in the second month, Iyar b'sheni. In this second month. What does in this second month teach us? In the second month by which we go ahead and count the reign of the kings. Which tells us, when does the year of the king begin? Chodesh Nisan. So I'll just point out something very interesting, that it is fascinating to see. So now we have two psukim. We have Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer, two different psukim, right? Rabbi Yochanan is quoting from Malachim Aleph, Rabbi Eliezer is quoting from Divrei Hayomim. The common denominator between the two psukim is, who are they both referring to? Shlomo, which is very interesting, Shlomo, and not David, right? You would have thought that if you're going to go and bring an example from a monarch, it would have been David. He was the first monarch, right? Leaving aside Shaul, I don't mean to say like that. Meaning David HaMelech, Shaul was of course the king also, but we always know Shaul was really, because he was from Shevet Ephraim, not from Shevet Yehuda, that was a little bit of a stopgap monarchy. Why not from David? So I'll say it's interesting, because remember, David HaMelech's monarchy is really only solidified how? Through Shlomo. It was Shlomo that created the dynastic monarchy for David, right? In other words, David was the first, but it only becomes a dynasty if it then is passed down to your son. So it's interesting that we seem to learn like monarchical protocol or monarchical framework, not from David, but from the first member of the Davidic dynasty, who was Shlomo. It's an interesting aside. Tanya Kavase, Rabbi Yochanan. So now, as I mentioned, we have two psukim. Rabbi Yochanan was on Beis Amud Beis. He quoted the pasuk from Malachim Aleph, which equated the reign of Shlomo with Yitzias Mitzrayim. And now we have Rabbi Eliezer over here, who Halacha L'Maisa is quoting from Divrei Hayomim. So now the Gemara quotes a Braisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan from yesterday's daf. The Gemara says, how do we know that we only count the years of the reign of a king from Nisan? It was 480 years from when the Jewish people left Egypt, and then the Navi goes on to discuss the reign of Shlomo. Uksiv Vayal. Shlomo said the Bryce over here is just quoting, restating everything we learned on Amud Beis, just in condensed form. Uksiv Vayal Aaron HaKohen al hara pi Hashem, uksiv, vahi ba'arbam shana b'ashtei asar chodesh, uksiv, acharei HaKoson HaSichon, va'omer v'ishma Knani, va'omer vayiru kol ha'ido ki gava Aaron, va'yomer vahi b'chodesh harishon b'shana Hashenis, va'omer vahi b'shana Hashenis b'chodesh Hasheni, va'omer b'chodesh Hasheni tzeis b'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim, va'omer vayachal ibnos. Okay, good. So I'll say, that's all Rabbi Yochanan. That's the entire drasha. So therefore I will say, it turns out, this is the end of this discussion. It turns out now that we have two, I will say, the reason I just went through it quickly is because that's everything we did in Rabbi Yochanan. We did all of that between yesterday and this morning. If you didn't recognize it, I don't know what to tell you. Either you came late or... So now listen to this. So just understand what just happened over here. So now, this closes out this piece of this discussion. So what we have now effectively is, we have proven the concept or the statement of the Mishnah that the Rosh Hashanah for Malachim is Nisan. We have two primary proofs for that. Again, either Rabbi Yochanan, ultimately again by Sefer Malachim, or Rabbi Eliezer Divrei Hayamim. Now, the difference between them, I just want to point out, is in Rabbi Yochanan, that is a multi-layered proof, right? Remember again, he's bringing in connection between Mitzrayim and the reign of Shlomo, and then again, that led to that whole discussion about how do you know in general that we are counting time by Yetzias Mitzrayim. You get into the death of Aaron in Av, the speech of Moshe in Shvat, you get into Sichon. Rabbi Eliezer's drasha is much more straightforward, right? Rabbi Eliezer's drasha is just the basheni. Okay, good. So I will say now an important qualification. Amar Rav Chisda, lo shana el malchei Yisrael. By the way, when we speak about counting the reign of a king from Nisan, which kings are we referring to? Jewish kings. Jewish kings, their reign is counted from Nisan. Aval malchi umos ha'olam. But for the kings of the nations of the world, Metishrei Maninan. They are counted ultimately, again, not from Nisan, but rather from Tishrei. So I will say a very interesting idea. Now, obviously, this is not necessarily referring to how the kings themselves count their reigns. It's talking about how we as Klal Yisrael historically track things. So for Jewish kings, the years of the reign are reckoned by Nisan. For non-Jewish kings, the years of the reign are reckoned by Tishrei. We'll say we're going to see, by the way, this tension, this fascinating tension. It's a fundamental machlokes. We're going to see when was the world created. Was the world created in Nisan? Was the world created in Tishrei? So we'll say, I'll just mention this now, but we'll focus on it more later on. That tension is focused on the following idea. In Tishrei, humanity was created. In Nisan, Klal Yisrael's mission and destiny became revealed. See, we only knew who we were and what we were to become when we left Mitzrayim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ta'avduna lahar hazeh, we're going to get to Torah. That's when our mission became clear. So creation existence is very nice, but purposeless existence is absolutely meaningless. So in Tishrei, there's a creation. But purpose, destiny, meaning really only becomes revealed in Nisan. So the Gemara is saying Gentile kings are counted from Tishrei because Tishrei is an important hallmark for all humanity, creation of man. Jewish kings are counted from Nisan because we'll say the power of Nisan is the power of destiny. The power of Nisan is that we have received our mission. The power of Nisan is that now I know what my purpose on this world actually is. And that is to be an Oved Hashem, ultimately again through connection, observance, and actualization of Torah. We'll speak more about this concept when we get into this machlokes. So the Gemara says, Shnei Amar, so we'll say this is a fascinating discussion now that we're going to have. Shnei Amar, Divrei Nechemya ben Chachalya. So we'll say the Gemara over here is quoting the pasuk from Nehemiah. So the Gemara here is going to describe the story of Nehemiah and his interactions with Daryavesh. Now I will say, I want to point out something very interesting over here, which is, we're going to be focusing now on 4 different kings. Really only on the 4th, but I'll just give you the other 3. 4 kings in succession. The first king we're going to talk about was Daryavesh Hamadi. So Daryavesh from Madai. We're going to see because there's 2 Daryaveshes. After Daryavesh of Madai comes Koresh HaParsi, Koresh the Persian. Now, Koresh the Persian was very important because Koresh was the one who gave permission to the Jews to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. He gave them permission. That permission, however, was stalled. By who? The next king, who was a man by the name of Achashverosh. Right? Achashverosh goes ahead and stalls the process of Beis HaMikdash destruction. Achashverosh has a son, Daryavesh HaParsi. Sorry, kings 1 and 4 are both named Daryavesh. First Daryavesh was Daryavesh from Madai, because remember again, there's a lot of conquering going on. Persia, Media, ultimately it's Greece that then comes in, and then Rome. In any event, that fourth king is Daryavesh HaParsi, Daryavesh the Persian, who of course is the son of Achashverosh and Esther. Now, leaving aside, we're not getting into this now, there's a fascinating discussion in general of, well, wasn't he Jewish? Wasn't Daryavesh the Persian Jewish? His mother was Esther. So we're going to see, it's interesting how he's looked at in the Gemara. But in any event, he was a good man, Daryavesh HaParsi, because he gave the final permission to actually go ahead and finish the construction of the Beis HaMikdash. And under his watch, the Beis HaMikdash was completed. Remember again, going back to Yuma a little bit, how did they pay homage to Daryavesh the Parsi? Remember again? Little Chazara. They had a specific tower in the Beis HaMikdash that was called Shushan Habira. Shushan Habira, right? It was called Shushan Habira. That was the homage that they paid to Daryavesh HaParsi, naming a tower in the Beis HaMikdash after the Persian Median Empire. So now again, that's the historical backdrop. So most of the conversations we're going to be talking about today are between Nehemiah and Daryavesh HaParsi. So now watch this. Here we go. Shneimar, really very, very beautiful and interesting Gemara. Shneimar, Divrei Nehemiah ben Chachaliah, vahi b'chodesh Kislev, shnas esrim. So these are the words of Nehemiah ben Chachaliah. This is the Navi Nehemiah. And it took place when? During Chodesh Kislev, in the 20th year. Uksiv, vahi b'chodesh Nisan, shnas esrim la'artach shasta. And it was in the month of Nisan, which was also the 20th year of the king Artaxshasta. So say, now watch this. If Kislev is the 20th year of the king's reign, and Nisan is still the 20th year of the king's reign, what does that tell me? What is that? And this is the king Artaxshasta. We don't know who Artaxshasta is. We'll find out who he is on Amud Beis. If it's still the 20th year in Kislev and Nisan, what does that tell you? That the Rosh Hashana for Gentile kings is not when? Is not Nisan. It must be Tishrei. So V'dikai b'Kislev v'kar leishnas esrim, v'kai b'Nisan v'kar leishnas esrim. If during Kislev you're still calling it the 20th year, and Nisan you're still calling it the 20th year, Mechlal de Rosh Hashana lav Nisanu. That shows that what? That halacha l'maisa, Rosh Hashana for Gentile kings is not Nisan. So the Gemara says Bishlam ahech mefarishat la'atar shasta. Elahai mimai de la'atar shachsta. La'artach shasta. So I'll say, the Gemara says, I don't understand. Pasuk number 2 speaks about the fact that it's the 20th year of the reign of Artaxshasta. But ultimately, again, Pasuk number 1 doesn't mention his name. So I know they're both talking about the same reign. Dilma Amud Beis. Dilma liminyona achrinahu. Maybe it's referring to a different account. Amra Papa shnas esrim l'gzera shava. Papa says, no, we make a gzera shava of 20th year. Ma hasam la'artach shasta avhacha la'artach shasta. Just like in the second pasuk, it's talking about in accordance with the reign of Artaxshasta, so too in the first pasuk it is as well. So both say, interestingly enough, this is our proof. The fact that Nehemiah is speaking in Kislev of the 20th year of Artaxshasta, and then in Nisan, he's speaking still in the 20th year of Artaxshasta, tells us that the reign of Gentile kings is not reckoned by Nisan, but rather it must be Tishrei. Now, both say, now of course, the pasuk doesn't prove that it's Tishrei, right? All the pasuk proves is that what? Is that it's Nisan. The truth is, we're assuming there's one of two dates to count calendrical things by. It's either going to be Nisan or it's going to be Tishrei. We'll see that later on, but that's the Gemara's presupposing. Umimai, the Mai said the Kislev Kadim, Dilma Mai said the Nisan Kadim. So first of all, the Gemara says, how do you know that the episode which occurred in Kislev preceded the episode which occurred in Nisan. Maybe Nisan came first, Kislev came second, and that's why they're reckoned part of the same year. To which the Gemara says, "Lo saravayt chodesanya devarim she'amar Hanani lenechemia b'Kislev Amran." So we'll also listen to this. Amran nechemia lemelech b'Nisan. No, because also we know that Hanani came and told Nehemiah. We'll talk about who Hanani is in just a moment. Hanani came and told things to Nehemiah in Kislev, and Nehemiah said those very things to the king, to Artaxerxes, who we're going to see is actually Daryavesh HaParsi, Daryavesh the Persian, son of Achashverosh and Esther. He told those things to the king in Nisan. Shabbos say, now what does this mean? What are the things that Hanani said to Nehemiah in Kislev? Both say this is very profound. Shnei Emar, both say, listen to how moving this pasuk is. Shnei Emar, Divrei Nehemiah ben Chachalya, Vahi b'chodesh Kislev, Shnas Esrim. So both listen to this. These are the words of Nehemiah ben Chachalya in Kislev in the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes. So Nehemiah tells us what happened. We'll say, listen to this. What happened in Kislev? This is Nehemiah talking. Vani hayisi b'Shushan Abira. So Nehemiah says, I was standing in Shushan Abira. So we'll say, you have to understand, this is a number of decades after the Purim story. So just to give a little bit of historical context, right? So the Jews are still living in the Persian Median Empire, right? So remember again, are there Jews in Eretz Yisrael? The answer is yes. We're going to see that in just a moment. So this is Nehemiah. Now talking about in Shushan. And remember again, Nehemiah is a trusted advisor. He was actually, by the way, we're going to see, he was the wine steward of the king. Nehemiah was the wine steward of the king. So Nehemiah is speaking, I was in Shushan Abira. Listen to this. Vayavel Hanani, echad me'achei, va'anashim Yehuda. And Hanani, one of my brothers. So Hanani says, I had a brother Hanani, and Hanani was living in Yehuda. He was living in Eretz Yisrael. And he came to visit me in Shushan Abira. Va'ash aleim ala Yehudim hapleita shenishru minashavi, va'al Yerushalayim. And I asked my brother, Hanani, how is the remnant of Jews in Eretz Yisrael doing? Right? How is the Pleita? So we'll say, this is incredible, by the way. The Sheres HaPleita, right? The remaining segment of Klal Yisrael, the majority of the Jews were not in Eretz Yisrael. There was a remaining segment in Eretz Yisrael. So Hanani comes to visit his brother. Isn't it describing such a moving scene? Hanani from Eretz Yisrael is coming to visit his brother Nehemiah in Shushan Abira. And Nehemiah, the first question is, how are the Jews of Eretz Yisrael? How are the Jews of Eretz Yisrael? How is the Sheirus HaPleit, the Shanishru Min HaShvi, Va'Yerushalayim? How is Yerushalayim? So we'll listen to the heartbreaking words of Hanani. Vayomru li, Hanish'arim asher nishru min HaShevi shama medina bira'a gidola ubecherpa. The plight of the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. The plight of the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. The remaining Jews is ra'a gidola. It's terrible. Ubecherpa. It's a degrading state. V'chomas Yerushalayim mifuretzes. The walls of Jerusalem are breached. Ushara nitzatsu be'esh, and its gates were set on fire. So we'll say, so remember again, this wasn't anything new. This was a result of the fact that everything remained in a state of destruction and just became more and more decrepit. I will say, sometimes you have to think about how privileged we are to live in the times in which we live, where although again things are not perfect, Mashiach's not yet here, Eretz Yisrael is not yet restored back to its former glory. But what a privilege we have to see the beginning of the Sechazena Einenu B'Shuvcha L'Tzion B'Rachamim. You think about what's happening in Eretz Yisrael. You think about the beautiful building, physical building, spiritual building, startup nation. You see all of these incredible things that are happening in Eretz Yisrael. It's mamish footsteps of Mashiach. It's unprecedented times in which we live. It's an overwhelming thing. You see the way they're describing Eretz Yisrael. So what happens? Nehemiah hears this report and he's heartbroken. So what happens? Amra Nehemiah lamelech b'Nisan. So interesting about this. So this is fascinating. So Nehemiah gets this report in Kislev, but he tells it over to the king in Nisan. Now, why the delay? It's not, again, the Navi doesn't tell us. So we'll say, but it is interesting. Remember, if you are a prominent Jew in a Gentile court and you want to advocate for the needs of your nation and your historical ancestral homeland, that requires a very delicate dance. Rabbi say the thing that the diaspora Jew has always been accused of is dual loyalty. And if you are the wine steward of the king, I would have to imagine it's probably a very delicate dance for how you're going to advocate for your people back in Eretz Yisrael, for your homeland. So I don't know if that's the reason why it took until Nisan. Whatever reason it takes until Nisan. Listen to this. So Nehemiah says, it's Nisan now, I'm coming to the king, I'm bringing the king his wine. Madua panecha roim. So we'll say, Artachshasta says to Nehemiah, why so sad? Right? I'm sorry?
That's Yosef. Yosef says.
Right, good, excellent. Correct. By the way, good. There's actually a lot of symmetry here between this story of the wine steward, Yosef's story with the wine steward, the Sar HaMashkim in the jail, and Yosef's story with Parazal. Again, a lot of overlap with this. So what happens? So Artachshasta says to Nehemiah, why do you look so sad? So the Gemara says, Va'ata ein chachola. So do you feel okay? Do you feel okay? It's an ein zekira leiv. Ve'ira harbe ma'od. So ultimately, again, he says, are you feeling all right? Is there a problem? Ve'ira harbe ma'od. So Nehemiah says, first white line of us, I was very scared. Va'omer lamelech. But finally I summoned up the courage and I said to the king, Va'omer hamelech liolam yichya. King, you should live forever. That's number one, right? Give praise to the king. Madua lo yira apanai. How could I not be downtrodden? Right? How could I not be tzibrachin? How could I not be broken? Asher penei ha'ir beis kivros avosai charva. The city of my forefathers, of where my forefathers are buried, is in a state of destruction. Ushara ochlu ba'ish, and its gates have been consumed by fire. So we'll say, so Nehemiah bears his soul to the king. First, he says the king should live forever. It's always a good way to start things off with the king. Right? The king should live forever. How could I not be tzibrachin, right? How could I not be broken and downtrodden? When I hear about the plight of my people, I hear how my people are suffering, and I hear how my beautiful city of Yerushalayim is in such a state of disrepair. Vayomer li HaMelech, Alma ze atam mevakesh, va'espalel Elokei HaShamayim. So ultimately, again, so the king says, what do you want? What do you want? Right? What is it that you need? Va'omer LaMelech, im al HaMelech tov, v'myitev avdecha lefanecha, asher tishalchini el Yehuda, el ir kivros avosai, ve'evnena. A very courageous ask. Right? So ultimately, again, Nehemiah says to the king, send me back home. Send me back home to the home of my forefathers and allow me to rebuild Yerushalayim. Allow me to rebuild. Vayomer li HaMelech. So the king said to me, Vashegel Yosheves Etzlo. Shegel, we're going to see what that means in tomorrow's daf. The Shegel is sitting next to him. Ad masayeh mahalecha umasay tashuv. So the king says, you can go, but tell me, when are you going and when are you returning? When are you go? So we'll say, by the way, dramatic. Absolutely dramatic. One of the king's closest advisors, one of the king's most closely trusted servants, and he says, I need to go back to Yerushalayim to rebuild my city, to rebuild my people. King says, okay, when are you going and when are you coming back? So the Gemara says, Vayitav lifnei HaMelech, ultimately again, Vayishacheni v'etneh lo zman. So ultimately again, he says that, I'm sure you'll know. He says that the king says, fine, gives him a time, comes back. So again, what's the point of this entire story? So right, remember again, all of this really was just the dramatic build-up that ultimately, again, there is a connection that the news that Nehemiah got in Kislev of year 20 was the same news that he gave over to Artachshasta in Nisan of year 20, and yet what? They're both considered year 20. So the point of this is that obviously the Rosh Hashanah for Malacha for Gentile kings is not going to be Nisan. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Masev Rav Yosef. So the Rav Yosef raises a kasha and he says, B'yom esrim v'arba l'chodesh, b'shishi b'shnas shtayim l'dar yavesh. So we'll say one pasuk says, B'yom esrim v'arba, it was on the 24th day of the 6th month, l'chodesh shishi, which is Elul, right? In b'shnas shtayim l'dar yavesh, in the second year of Dar Yavesh, uksiv b'shvi'i be'esrim v'echad l'chodesh. And we'll say, then it says, in the 7th month, which is Tishrei, v'im Isa, and if you're correct, that ultimately, again, for Gentile kings, we count from Tishrei, then it should have said, b'shvi'i b'shnas gimel yoyle. Then the pasuk should reflect that already Tishrei is year number 3. Rabbi Avo, Koresh, melech kasher haya, lefichach manu lo kimalchei Yisrael. So we'll say this is incredible. So the Gemara explains, you're right. As much as we say that for Gentile kings we count as of Tishrei, not Nisan, there is an exception. The exception is apparently exceptionally righteous Gentile kings are counted like Jewish kings and are counted from Nisan. Then I will say this goes back to what I said to you before. This is interesting because the Koresh we're referring to, right? So Koresh, fine. So the Gemara says now this is the Koresh who's the king before Achashverosh, who gave the initial permission to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. So because he's a kosher, because he was reckoned as someone who was pious, therefore again halacha l'maaseh, his reign was counted as of Tishrei, as of Nisan. Excuse me. So the Gemara says Maskef Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef is the kasha chada de'im kein kosher kra'adadi. So first of all, number one, if you're going ahead and this is correct, we have a problem because the psukim contradict each other. Dichsev, so quotes over here the pasuk from Ezra. V'sheitze baisa dona ad yom telasa liyireach adar dihishnas sheis lemalchos dayavish malka, which literally means that this building, referring to the Beis Hamikdash, was completed ad yom telasa liyerach adar. That was ultimately was finished, right? The building of the Beis Hamikdash under Dar Yavesh was completed in the month of Adar. Dihishnas shis lemalchus Dar Yavesh malka. That was the 6th year of the reign of Dar Yavesh. V'tanya, we learned ba'osa zman l'shana haba Allah Ezra mi Bavel v'galusa imo. And we learned that in that ba'osa zman, in that same time, in the following year. Now we'll say the following year we're going to see actually means 2 years later, not 1 year later. Ezra goes up with the remnant of Klal Yisrael. Uksiv vayavu Yerushalayim. Ezra comes to Yerushalayim. B'chodesh hachamishi, in the 5th month, which is the month of Av. Shnas hashviyas lamelech, the 7th year of the king. But in fact, if you're correct, it shouldn't be the 7th year of the king. It should actually be the 8th year of the king. V'im isa shnas shminis mi bailei. Va'od, furthermore, midami. Again, also we seem to be interchanging names over here. Midami hasam koresh hachar dar yavesh. Aren't we referring to 2 different kings? One pasuk is referring to Koresh, one pasuk is referring to Dar Yavesh, to which the Gemara says, you're right. Tana, hu Koresh, hu Dar Yavesh, hu Artach Shasta. The Gemara says something amazing. That Koresh, Dar Yavesh, and Artach Shasta are all the same person. Now, I want to be clear. It is clear that there are different kings. There are different kings. What the Gemara seems to be referring to is Daryavesh HaParsi, Daryavesh the Persian, who was the son of Achashverosh, was sometimes referred to as Daryavesh, sometimes referred to as Koresh, and sometimes referred to as Artachshasta. So I will say Koresh Shemalach Kasher Haya. Right? Ultimately, again, Koresh, he was a good guy. He was a good man. Artachshasta al Shem Malchuso. So I will say he was called Koresh because he was a kasher. What does that mean? I will say Koresh and kasher are the same letters, right? So the name Koresh is actually not his name. The name Koresh is a descriptive term. We called him Koresh. Why? Because he's a kasher. Right? His name, Artachshasta, was actually another name for his monarchy. Umashmo, what was his actual name? Daryavesh. So I will say, so once again, we're referring to kingdom number 4 out of the 4 kings that I mentioned. Daryavesh HaParsi, the son of Achashverosh. So again, his name was Daryavesh. He was called Koresh. Why? Because he was a kosher, and the name of his monarchy ultimately again was Artaxshasta. Mikro Makom Kasha, but still we have a contradiction in the Psukim. Rabbi Yitzchok lo Kasha. Kan Kodem Shehichmitz, Kan La'achar Shehichmitz. So wow. We'll say, listen to this. Apparently, Daryavesh at a certain point in time became chametz, which means what Rabbi was saying, he was a good man in the beginning, but then unfortunately suffers certain spiritual setbacks as time goes on. Maskef Rav Kahana umi hechmitz. Rav Kahana says, but really, did he become chametz? So therefore, I will say, what's happening over here is as follows. So you really begin to see a very dramatic progression unfolding over here. So first of all, it gets a little bit confusing because now we have one king, the final king, who has the name as previous kings as well. But the Gemara seems to indicate that. But again, I just point out, by the way, if Koresh is a descriptive name that he's a kosher, why not call him what? Kosher, right? Why not call him kosher? So first of all, because it may not be respectful for Jews to refer to the Gentile monarch as kosher, and also now that we know about what ultimately happened with him, that there was a certain point in time where he became chametz, perhaps referring to him as a kosher is not appropriate as well. So I will say, the Gemara says, umi hechmitz, is that true? So Rashi points out over here, hichmitz, look at Rashi, hichmitz naaseh rasha kisha'ala Ezra kivar hichmitz. We're going to see, I will say, that by the time Ezra led up the contingent of Jews to Eretz Yisrael, he had already become chametz. He had already soured and ultimately reverted to negative ways. Also, we'll stop over here. We'll pick up in Yirtz Hashem tomorrow with the discussion about the change in Daryavesh, also known as Koresh, also known as Artaxshasta. Kashach, I will say.